The room was dressed for celebration, but something was off. Champagne had already been poured. Yet no one raised a glass. The slide behind the board table displayed the number we were supposed to be proud of, 195 million, but the applause that followed felt rehearsed. Careful, almost restrained. Dustin Falk, my father and the company's founder, stood at the head of the table. He didn't look at me when he smiled. That was the first sign. In our family, eye contact mattered. Avoiding it meant a decision had already been made. As of today, he said evenly, Lauren will take over as CEO. This company needs the right Falk to lead it. Lauren, my younger sister, sat a few seats away, hands folded, wearing the kind of calm that comes from knowing the ending in advance. The room seemed to freeze. Indeed it did. It's quite cold today. I just turned on the heater and sat there for quite a while. What's the temperature where you are right now? And if you're still here with me, please leave your lucky number as a greeting between us. She held the vice president title, handled public appearances, and spoke confidently about vision. What she had never done was run operations, manage a crisis, or close a major contract. I was sitting there as chief operating officer, the daughter who had taken this company from $14 million to 195. I built the systems. I handled the collapses. I made the calls that kept us alive when reputation didn't matter, and results did. My father called my work critical support. He praised my execution, then framed leadership as something separate, something inherited, not earned. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was clean, public, surgical. I didn't argue. I didn't look at Lauren. I kept writing in my notebook, steady and quiet, while the room pretended this was succession, not erasure. When the meeting ended, people avoided conversation. Celebration dissolved into silence. Back in my office, I sent one email to internal legal. Subject governance clarification, no emotion, just intent. Before we continue, I want to be clear with you. The story you're about to hear is a blend of real workplace situations and fictional elements, with artificial intelligence used to deepen the emotional experience and help deliver the message. I hope it resonates with you, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. Please rest well and take care of yourself tonight. My name vanished from the strategic report circulated that morning, replaced by a generic title that said Operations Oversight. Lauren called it Alignment. She said we were moving in a new direction, and the room nodded as if direction erased history. Budget approvals disappeared next. Systems I had designed now required her signature. Requests stalled. Decisions slowed. I watched processes bend around someone who had never built them. When I asked for clarification, Lauren smiled and said leadership needed clarity, not friction. It wasn't sudden. It was methodical. Emails excluded me. Meetings shifted times. Language changed. I had become invisible without being gone. I remembered the years they were now rewriting. 2 acquisitions on the edge of collapse. Stabilized because I renegotiated debt through a single weekend. A $40 million contract salvaged after legal threatened to walk. A $60 million expansion secured when no one else would take the call. Those numbers weren't vision. They were survival. Dustin Falk never intervened. My father watched from the head of the table, distant and final. When I pushed back once, carefully, he said Lauren needed room to lead. He told me to support her. His tone carried no doubt. The message was clear. I was expected to shrink quietly. By the end of the week, a strategic partner paused negotiations. Their counsel cited one issue, only key executive missing from approvals. Lauren blamed timing. Dustin blamed the market. I said nothing and waited. I knew the meeting would go badly the moment Lauren started talking numbers instead of terms. The $28 million deal looked simple on the slide, but the client's silence told a different story. They weren't listening anymore. They were watching her miss what mattered. She pushed the proposal forward anyway. Voice steady, smiling through resistance. When the client's counsel asked about risk allocation, she glanced at the screen, then at legal. The pause was long enough to be noticed. I felt it ripple across the table like a crack in glass. An hour later. The call ended without commitment. Lauren didn't wait. "The framework is outdated," she said, turning toward me. "We're still operating on Terran's old systems." Her tone was polished, rehearsed, decisive. The room accepted it because blame always needs a direction. Dustin followed immediately. My father leaned back, hands folded, and said, "This is exactly why transitions matter. We can't afford operational drag." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The implication landed harder than anger. I sat still, measuring my breathing, listening to people discuss a failure I had predicted and quietly warned against. No one asked. No one wanted interruption from the person they had just erased. I remembered negotiating under worse pressure. 40 million saved by rewriting exit clauses overnight. 60 million secured after flying cross-country to salvage trust that had already collapsed. Those deals worked because I understood the mechanics beneath the promises. Lauren ended the meeting with confidence she hadn't earned. "We'll revisit next quarter," she said. That was when legal finally spoke. "I need to clarify something," our internal counsel said carefully. "The agreement discussed today includes a key executive provision. It requires Taryn Blake's authorization to be binding." Silence returned, heavier this time. Lauren frowned. Dustin turned slowly toward me. I met his gaze without expression. The deal hadn't failed because of timing or systems. It failed because the company had tried to move without the person legally required to make it move at all. That truth hung between us. Cold, undeniable, and far more expensive than pride alone. I didn't rush after the deal stalled. Panic belongs to people who don't know where the levers are. I spent the afternoon reviewing documents I had signed years ago, the ones everyone else treated as background noise. Those papers were never symbolic. They were structural. My name sat where it always had: Senior Operating Authority, Final Execution Rights. The language was dull, precise, legally unforgiving. While Lauren was announcing momentum, the company was still required to move through me. There were other layers, too. Licensing agreements tied to proprietary systems I had negotiated personally, intellectual property registered under my oversight, embedded inside client contracts no one had reread since the early growth years. I hadn't hidden them. I had simply understood them. Lauren discovered this the hard way. She summoned me to her office. Voice clipped. "Legal says you're blocking progress." I corrected her calmly. "I'm not blocking anything. The structure is..." That afternoon, she hired outside counsel. I recognized the firm immediately. Expensive, aggressive, used when someone wanted pressure instead of clarity. They requested revisions to executive authority, phrased as modernization. I declined without explanation. The confrontation escalated in the boardroom. Lauren insisted. "We need flexibility to operate." Dustin supported her. Impatient now, frustrated that things were not obeying titles. He looked at me and said, "This shouldn't be complicated." "It isn't." I replied, "It's documented." The lawyers finally spoke, not Lauren's. Ours. Internal counsel cleared his throat and said, "Any unilateral change to CEO authority without majority shareholder approval constitutes a breach of the shareholders' agreement." Silence settled again, familiar but sharper. Lauren stared at the table. Dustin asked the question he should have asked years earlier. "When was this signed before the last expansion?" Legal answered, "It's binding." No one looked at me after that. They were too busy realizing they had been fighting a system they never bothered to read, let alone understand. I remained still, not triumphant, not angry, just aware that control doesn't announce itself. It waits, patient and intact, until everyone else finally notices it was always there. That was the difference. Exactly. If you believe I did the right thing by letting the contracts and shareholder rules speak instead of reacting emotionally, leave a single dot in the comments your voice deserves to be seen and shared. I expected resistance, but I didn't expect it to come wrapped in the word family. Dustin called me late that evening, his voice low, controlled, rehearsed. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. as if the fracture hadn't started with his decision. He spoke about loyalty, about legacy, about blood. None of it mentioned results. The pressure intensified quickly. Lauren didn't confront me directly. She didn't have to. Information began leaking in careful pieces. Internal emails quoted out of context. Budget numbers framed as hoarding. I was suddenly described to investors as power-hungry, inflexible, unwilling to let go. The narrative spread faster than truth ever does. Board members stopped asking questions and started making assumptions. Old allies grew cautious. I watched reputations shift in real time. Not because facts had changed, but because tone had. Lauren smiled through it all, letting implication do the work she couldn't. Dustin reinforced it. In meetings, he spoke about unity while glancing at me only when assigning blame. He said leadership required sacrifice. He meant mine. When I defended process, he accused me of ego when I stayed quiet. He called it defiance. I didn't argue. I listened. Betrayal has a sound when you know it well enough. It's calm, it's reasonable, it pretends to be concern. That night, I opened an old archive folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an email Dustin sent during the expansion crisis, written in his own words. Unguarded. I'm giving you full authority. It read, do whatever you need to protect the company. I trust you. I forwarded nothing. I printed nothing. I simply saved it somewhere safe. By morning, Lauren's whispers grew louder. By afternoon, Dustin demanded compromise. I agreed to neither. They believed family pressure would break me. They didn't realize it had already freed me, because the truth was documented, dated, and signed by the same man now calling me the problem. I understood then that their coldness was calculated, and my restraint was not weakness, but preparation. Measured and deliberate, waiting for the moment when denial could no longer survive publicly anywhere. I was informed of the emergency board meeting less than an hour before it started, which told me everything I needed to know. Panic had finally replaced confidence. When I entered the room, Lauren was already speaking, standing beside a screen filled with abstract phrases about vision, momentum, and cultural alignment. She sounded certain, practiced, safe. None of it addressed the stalled contracts, the delayed cash flow, or the missing approvals everyone was pretending not to see. When it was my turn, I didn't stand. I opened a folder. I spoke quietly. Revenue projections corrected for frozen capital. Current burn rate. Contractual obligations triggered by leadership instability. I named figures Lauren had skipped. I referenced clauses she had never read. The room shifted as numbers replaced adjectives. Questions followed, sharp and technical. I answered each one without embellishment. I showed where cash actually moved, where signatures were required, where delays were already costing millions. No speeches, no defense, just evidence. Lauren interrupted once. This is short-term disruption, she said. Vision requires patience. I looked at the board and replied, liquidity does not. Dustin tried to regain control. He spoke about trust, about family continuity, about weathering temporary pressure. I watched directors exchange glances. They weren't choosing sides. They were choosing survival. Then the call came in from our largest institutional investor. The room went silent as legal put them on speaker. Their representative didn't hesitate. We're suspending further capital deployment, effective immediately, he said. If current leadership remains unchanged, we cannot justify exposure. Lauren froze. Dustin asked for clarification. The answer was simple. Confidence had conditions. The meeting ended without a vote. No one needed one. As directors filed out, they avoided eye contact again. But this time, it wasn't discomfort. It was realization. The trap had closed quietly, not with confrontation, but with numbers, contracts, and consequences they could no longer explain away. I gathered my papers calmly, knowing the board had already shifted, and that the next move would not come from anger, but from leverage they had finally been forced to acknowledge in absolute silence afterward together. I didn't celebrate when the collapse started. Relief came sharp, controlled, almost surgical. Lauren's first real decision without guardrails triggered it. A rushed reforecast pushed revenue forward while costs stayed buried. The numbers looked clean on slides. But cash told a different story. Payments slipped, covenants tightened, suppliers called. She tried to correct it quietly, authorizing an advance to cover gaps she didn't fully understand. That single move breached a reserve requirement tied to our licensing structure by afternoon. Accounting flagged the discrepancy. By evening, reporters were asking questions. The press moved faster than the board. An analyst noticed inconsistencies between guidance and filings, then connected them to delayed disclosures. Headlines followed, careful at first, then pointed. Words like misstatement and oversight appeared, polite substitutes for negligence. Lauren blamed legacy complexity. She blamed systems. She blamed me, indirectly. Again, Dustin lost control in public. He raised his voice in meetings, demanded loyalty, accused advisors of betrayal. The calm authority he relied on cracked. Directors stopped deferring. Counsel stopped softening language. The company felt the shift immediately, like temperature dropping without warning. I stayed precise. I answered questions with documents, not explanations. I corrected nothing that wasn't asked. The facts did their work. Lauren tried to rally support, but every defense added another timestamp, another contradiction. The silence after each answer cut deeper than argument. Then audit intervened. The committee chair requested an emergency review, citing risk exposure and governance obligations. Scope was narrow, target was clear. Internal controls tied to executive authorization would be examined. Effective immediately. Lauren's name appeared repeatedly in the request. The notice circulated before anyone could spin it. Dustin read it twice. Then once more, as if repetition might change the words. Lauren went pale. I felt something release and harden at the same time. This wasn't vengeance. It was consequence. Systems respond when pushed beyond tolerance. I didn't move to accelerate it. I didn't need to. The collapse had its own momentum now. Cold and efficient. And it was aimed exactly where the errors had been made. Nothing remained hidden. And accountability arrived without mercy. I didn't hear from Dustin for 2 days after the audit notice circulated, and the silence felt heavier than any accusation. When he finally asked to meet, his message was brief, stripped of authority, almost careful. We sat in the same conference room where he once decided my future without hesitation, but this time he didn't take the head seat. "Help me fix this," he said. Quietly, it was the first time my father had ever lowered his voice to me in business. No speeches, no lessons, just fatigue and regret. He admitted Lauren wasn't ready, that he had mistaken confidence for competence, loyalty for leadership. Each sentence landed late, after the damage had already been documented. I listened without interrupting. I let him explain how investors were calling him directly now, how advisors stopped cushioning their words, how the company he built no longer responded to his presence. He asked if there was a way to stabilize things, to reassure the board, to slow the fallout. There was. I had known it for weeks. "You chose wrong," I said, evenly. "And now the system is correcting that choice." He flinched, not in anger, but recognition, for a moment. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. The authority he relied on had evaporated, leaving only a man facing consequences he couldn't override. He asked what I needed. I didn't negotiate. I stated terms. He would step away from all operational involvement, immediately and publicly. No shadow influence, no calls to executives, no quiet guidance framed as advice. The company required distance from the decision that caused this. Dustin stared at me, searching for compromise. There was none. When he nodded, it wasn't agreement. It was surrender. The regret was real. But it arrived too late to change anything except the ending. I left the room knowing he finally understood what I had built, and what his choice had cost us both. That understanding didn't heal the damage, but it closed a chapter defined by denial, leaving accountability, consequence, and silence to do the remaining work without excuses or reversals. I didn't attend the meeting expecting relief, but certainty arrived anyway. The board vote was procedural, almost quiet, because by then the outcome had already been priced into the room. Lauren was removed from the board effective immediately, not with outrage, but with language about fiduciary duty and reputational risk. Her title vanished in a paragraph. Dustin followed. He stood, cleared his throat, and announced his retirement. No defense, no legacy speech, just a statement prepared by counsel and signed without edits. The man who once decided everything in a single sentence no longer decided anything at all. They turned to me next. The appointment was unanimous. Interim disappeared from the title before it ever existed. I accepted without emotion, because emotion had never been the point. Control was. Lauren looked at me then, waiting for the final blow. She expected termination, exile, spectacle. She didn't get it. I didn't fire her. I stripped her authority instead. Reporting lines reassigned, access revoked, committees restructured. She remained employed, isolated inside a system that no longer responded to her presence. Dustin said nothing. He didn't need to. His resignation had already answered every question. The press release framed it as stability. Investors called it overdue. Employees felt it immediately. Decisions moved again. Approvals cleared. Silence returned. But this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was alignment. Lauren stayed quiet. 2. Without power. There was nothing left to leak, nothing to manipulate. She had position without influence, visibility without reach. It was colder than termination, and far more permanent. When the room emptied, I stayed behind and signed my first document as CEO. Not a grand vision. A corrective measure restoring authority where it had always belonged. Justice didn't announce itself. It settled, clean, final, satisfying in the way only inevitability can be. When consequences arrive without anger, and control returns to the hands that had never let go, only waited for the right moment to reclaim it fully. There was no applause, no celebration, only a quiet recognition that power had corrected itself, and the company would move forward without illusions anymore now. I didn't mark the recovery with speeches or celebrations. The company moved forward quietly. The way healthy systems always do, contracts resumed, cash flow stabilized, and growth returned without drama. Decisions cleared faster because authority was no longer contested. The structure finally matched the work behind it. The family didn't recover the same way. Dinners stopped. Calls became formal, then rare. That loss stayed with me, but it didn't weaken the company. If anything, distance removed interference, and the business became stronger because of it. I focused on execution, not validation. I hired carefully, delegated clearly, and protected the controls that had saved us. There was no need to explain the past anymore. Results spoke cleanly. They didn't lose because I fought back. They lost because I stopped carrying them. That was the victory. No applause, no forgiveness. Just balance restored and momentum sustained. Built on accountability instead of expectation. There's a moment in stories like this that never makes it into spreadsheets or press releases. It's the quiet second when you realize the rules you trusted were never designed to protect effort, only appearance. I felt that moment in my chest. Not as anger, but as clarity. Systems reward what they can measure. Families reward what they prefer. When those collide, someone always gets erased. What stayed with me wasn't the power shift or the title. It was the question no one asked out loud: if loyalty cost you your voice, is it still loyalty? Or just habit? I didn't win by being louder or harsher. I won by refusing to disappear, by letting structure and consequence speak when emotion would have weakened the truth. If you were sitting where I sat, would you stay quiet to keep peace, or risk everything to keep yourself? Would you protect the people who overlooked you, or protect the work that proved who you are? There isn't a clean answer. There's only the one you can live with. If this story feels close to your own life, tell me where you're listening from right now. Someone else reading that comment may realize they aren't alone. And if you believe stories like this matter, A simple action from you can help them travel further. A subscribe helps this voice reach someone who needs it. A like tells the system this story has value. A share might change how someone sees their own situation. You're not just watching, you're helping these stories exist. And sometimes, that's how real change begins. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.